My name is Bobby Flores. I'm a candidate for sheriff here in El Paso County. I did run the team for 17 years, so if you have any questions on that, I can tell you that it's very, very different from what you see on TV, especially out here, because you're always training in the hot sun and with all your gear on, and it's like, oh, that's no fun. But if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Your background in SWAT and drug trafficking initiatives, how do you plan to address the ongoing challenges of organized crime?
That's huge. Okay, so when you're looking at organized crime, you got to really look at the fact that organized crime originates outside of our jurisdiction. The majority of organized crime is run from what country in this area? Mexico, right? So we have to work with the Mexican government. And the Mexican government, they have their problems, right? You've got some corruption issues there. I mean, we have our share of corruption. Trust me, it's not just the Mexican government, but there's corruption issues over there. The only way that I could answer that question is we have to work with all of our partners, our federal partners, the FBI, the DEA, the Department of State. We have to work with them, and as we start building our cases, we start finding out where they're originating, and then we begin focusing on our organized crime bosses, and that's where we start the paperwork to have them extradited to the United States. Remember, like Chapo Guzman, he was extradited to the United States because of cases that they started in Chicago, Illinois. He was responsible for a lot of drug trafficking through El Paso, but he was actually indicted in the majority of his cases in Chicago, Illinois. So the only way that you're ever going to get a handle on organized crime is getting both governments to work together and getting your federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies working together. And we're doing that. Like I said, when I was assigned to DEA, I was part of a task force. And we ran several organized crime drug enforcement task force investigations while I was there. But there's a lot more crime than there are investigators, so it does become more difficult, but we will do our best. But that's a great question, though. Thank you.
So you have a disciplinary record, so I was just wondering, do you think that has the possibility of lowering the reputation of the sheriff's office, and what steps, if any, do you plan on taking to ensure that that doesn't happen?
No, because see, look, law enforcement is about accountability, okay? All law enforcement, you come into the agency, everything that you ever do, good or bad, mostly bad, is documented. You have to. It's called accountability. It's called behavior modification. If you come in to work and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then the first time we give you a letter of reprimand and we say, hey, look, we need you to change your behavior. So your job is to make sure that you don't do that again. Okay? Because the next time you're not going to get a letter of reprimand. The letter of reprimand is the lowest level of discipline. And guys, at 33 and a half years, I'm going to tell you, I was not a perfect officer. We've all made mistakes. But I will tell you this, that I never made the same mistake twice, because I learned from my mistakes. And I've never been suspended. I've never been demoted. I've never been transferred. So when people bring up the disciplinary history, and it's like, yeah, every law enforcement officer has a disciplinary history if your law enforcement agency has accountability to the community. The reason that my opponent brings up the disciplinary history so extensively is because my opponent has never worked in an agency with accountability. He's never been a cop. He worked 2 years with the Socorro Police Department. They don't have an internal affairs. They don't document your discipline. And then he went and became a bailiff, and then he went and became a constable. So they don't have an internal affairs. There's no discipline to document there. They will never do it. So that's the vast difference. I've worked in an agency that's been accountable to the community for 33 years, and he has not. So that's why I have a disciplinary history and he doesn't. But that's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So you had mentioned something along the lines about peaceful protest and public safety.
Yes.
And there's a lot of discourse right now on college campuses.
Yes.
Could you explain to the youth in regards to why these peaceful protests are being disrupted without peace?
Okay. So, what gives you the right to peacefully protest in the United States? What gives you the right? Anybody tell me? Constitution. First Amendment. There you go. There we go. The First Amendment, right? First Amendment gives you the right to protest, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, right? Freedom of, so it gives you the right to protest. But remember, the term here is peacefully. So if you all decide, and we'll just take this hypothetically, that you were going to protest here, the school and law enforcement has a right to tell you where you can protest. You do not have the right to protest and disrupt classes. You do not have the right to protest and place anyone or any property in danger of being damaged. So we can designate an area. We can say, look, you can protest up and down the sidewalk in front of the school, but you cannot block traffic because now you're violating the law. You cannot go into the school, and you can't cause property damage. So even your First Amendment constitutional right has limitations. Everything has its limitations. So what's been happening is you have these people who are conducting these protests, and it's not just the actual college students, because if you look at a lot of the debriefs on it, it's actually people who are coming in from the outside who are stirring the pot even more and causing more of the problems. It's not necessarily just the college students, but although the college students are involved in the protests. So that's when law enforcement gets involved. That's when we have a responsibility to quell any riots. We have a responsibility to safeguard property. We have a responsibility to safeguard the school. Just because you have that right to protest does not mean you're allowed to place people in danger or property in danger. So understanding when you watch this on TV, take a look at where the line's been drawn, and you'll see the majority of the time, because we all work off of our body cameras. We use drones to videotape the protests, and if it comes down to situations where we've got to act, we've actually got to start pulling people out of the crowd, and we've got to start making arrests. But that's our job. But keep that in mind. If you're ever involved in a protest, number one, it's got to be peaceful. Number two, it's got to be within the parameters that are set by law enforcement or by the school. You can't do it inside the school. You can't block traffic. You can't do any of that. And you can peacefully protest all up and down the sidewalk as much as you want. That's your constitutional right, and we will always safeguard that constitutional right for you, because that's what our country is based on. Did I answer your question? Yes. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just a really quick one. What is a constable?
So a constable is a peace officer by definition. Okay, we're all peace officers. Anybody who has arrest authority is a peace officer in the state of Texas. But their responsibilities are very, very different. A constable works in a precinct. Okay, so in El Paso you have 7 precincts. Okay, so you have 7 constables. And a constable will work in his precinct, and he will usually go out and serve civil process, which is basically lawsuit paperwork for the justice of the peace for small claims. So they do have the authority to give you tickets. Okay, they do have the authority to make arrests, but in El Paso, that's not their responsibility. They just go out, they serve papers. You just walk up and say, here, you got to be in court on this day. Here, you got to be in court on this day. And then they go back and they provide security for their courtroom in that justice of the peace. That's what they do here. So it's a far cry from the responsibilities that the sheriff has. You will never see a constable respond to your house on a 911 hang-up. You'll never see a constable respond to your house on a family violence call. You won't see them work your car accidents. In fact, they'll usually pull up, see if anybody's busy, call for the sheriff's office or police department, and drive off. That's what they do. But that's the role that they play here. So there's a stark distinction between the duties of each. Very good question. Thank you.
So how do you plan, what steps are you taking to win the runoff and then win the general? How are you going to then go through that and then get into office?
Well, coming out and speaking to people. That's the big thing. People have to buy into what you're selling, right? I'm focusing on my experience. I'm focusing on my qualifications, and I'm hoping that people will trust in me to do it. I've got another speaking engagement after this. And then in the evenings, we're actually, in the afternoons, not so much the evenings, the afternoons, we're actually out walking, and we're going to registered voters' homes, and we're delivering our handouts, and we're speaking to them. And people will ask questions just like you all are asking questions. So it all comes down to having interaction and getting in touch with the community and letting people know, hey, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. And ultimately, it's up to the voters. Up to the voters to decide, and that has to always be respected. You know, if you look at what happened January 6th, a few years back, it's unacceptable in this country. You can't have that. You know, the voters are going to decide, like it or not, whether it works out in my favor or not, that's got to be respected.
What's your opinion on the border crisis?
Wow. Okay, so the question was, what's the opinion on the border crisis? So, as a law enforcement officer, I'm concerned with public safety, and I've told you that a million times, right? Immigration is not my responsibility. That is the responsibility of your federal government. That's the responsibility of Homeland Security. That's where your president comes in. That's where your Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas come in. They're the ones who are responsible for immigration. I can tell you that from a public safety perspective, it doesn't matter to me if you're here legally or illegally. If you're committing a crime, we're going to take action. Okay, we have Venezuelan groups that are now starting to organize here in El Paso, and a lot of those they're becoming pretty strong gangs, and they're becoming very organized. That concerns me. The fact that they came here from Venezuela doesn't concern me because that's not my problem as a law enforcement officer. But as a community, we all need to be aware of what's going on, right? And that's why I tell you, get involved. Get involved with your community. There's SB4. Have you all heard of SB4? Everybody talks about SB4, right? So my answer has always been the same. We address it from a community perspective, a community safety perspective. The reason I don't like the way SB4 was brought up is because border communities like El Paso, when you write a law that addresses a person's citizenship, then those people are not going to trust law enforcement. And if we have people who are here and they're not documented and they're here illegally, we want them to be able to come to law enforcement and report crimes, especially if they happen to them, right? We don't want women who have been trafficked or women who have been raped to not come to law enforcement because they're afraid, thinking that they're going to be deported. We have to be able to protect our victims. So it's a very, very complex issue, but I can tell you that it's simple from my perspective. It comes down to public safety and safeguarding people's constitutional rights.
What do you think of your opponent?
Well, you know, it's funny because it's hard to run against your friends. My opponent is a friend of mine. You know, and we've all been in law enforcement for several years. I know he's got his he brings what he brings to the table. He's got his experiences. I can tell you that when it comes to comparing us in this race, I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel I was a better candidate, if I didn't feel that I brought more to the table and could serve the community better. That's not to say he can't. I'm just telling you that in this, as the sheriff, I think I'm much better. He's a law enforcement officer. I respect the guy. He's a nice guy. And politics is tough, man. You know, I'm hoping that we'll still be friends after this is over. I don't know if we're going to be. But you know, I mean, he's got his bills to pay. He's got his family to support. And I just think that when it comes to running this office, we need to cut through the smoke and mirrors and be very, very honest. You all remember what happened to our last DA, right? You know, we elected a DA, and she wasn't qualified for the job. And we had several criminal cases just dismissed. We had people released back into the community. We still haven't been able to prosecute the Walmart shooter because of her tenure there, because she refused to do anything with it. I actually had a young lady who killed her infant, stabbed her infant 9 times, and she received 8 years probation from that district attorney. You know, that was not justice. You know, we worked that case. It was my group of detectives. I oversaw that investigation, and I was very disappointed to see that all she received was probation on a plea deal. She didn't even go to court. It was just a plea deal, because the statute because they were running out of time to take it to court. It wasn't the statute of limitations, but she didn't do her job, is what it came down to. So as a member of this community, I don't want to see somebody like that take over the sheriff's office. And you need to elect somebody who knows what they're doing. The sheriff's office, you know, the duty of the sheriff's office, like I told you, is to maintain the jails, to maintain public safety. One of the things that we haven't done, and I know there's probably nobody that's affected by this, but have you all seen the growth out in far east El Paso? Like out there where the new Cracker Barrel is, the Dave's Hot Chicken, all that area. Well, all that area has grown, and as an agency, we have not accommodated that growth. There's only 2 officers patrolling that whole area, and I live out there. Okay, so I can tell you that 2 officers working in that area, all these homes that have been built, all these businesses, that Amazon that just went up, all of that area is being patrolled by 2 district officers. We need more officers in that area. People are paying very high property taxes. People are paying for services, and I don't think that they're getting the services that they need. That's the first thing. We need more officers out in those areas that are growing. The second thing I'm going to tell you all is, having been an assistant chief over the jail annex, we have a lot of people with mental health. We talk about mental health a lot, right? Everybody hear about, mental health's got to be a priority. Well, let me tell you that unfortunately our jails have become the new mental health facilities for the communities, and that's not the best thing for them. You know, people with mental illnesses are being arrested. They're being arrested on small crimes like criminal trespass or other misdemeanors. And then because they're suffering from mental illnesses, when they're being taken into custody, they start fighting. So now they go from a criminal trespass to an assault against an officer charge, and now they've got felony charges. So the opportunity for them to get in and have their case settled quickly is now going to take even longer, because now they're being charged with felonies. Well, while they're in the jail, they're a very vulnerable population. So many times they're injured, they're beat up. So we have to separate them from the general population. So when you separate them, what do? You isolate them. How many people could tell me that if you're suffering from mental illness, isolation is a good thing? It's not. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I can tell you that it's not. So I want to work with the mental health community to start finding alternatives to incarceration for these individuals who are suffering severely from these mental health cases. Mental health is a community problem. It's not a law enforcement problem. And anybody who comes and tells you that they can solve the problem, I would throw the flag and say, no, that's not true. We all as a community need to come together. So I want to get with the mental health treatment professionals, the people who know about the treatment side, get them involved, and let's start finding opportunities for these people to take them out of jails and get them the treatment that they need. Now, there are people who suffer from mental illnesses that aren't as severe and they still commit crimes. Those aren't the people I'm referring to. Okay, I know that there's some mental health issues with the Walmart shooter right now. And they're talking about whether or not he's going to be eligible for the death penalty, and that's one of the things that everybody's throwing around. So it's like this big hot potato. But the reality of it is that we all have to deal with mental illness. We have it in our community. We have it in your families. We have it in my family. And this is a community problem that we all have to work together in. And I want to start with the jails, because I don't feel that those people need to be incarcerated like that.
And so how do you want to implement these changes without burdening the taxpayers?
So the mental health side, we're going to have to reach out to the treatment people and find a way to fund it, whether it be through grants, whether it be through reallocation of money that's within our budget. That one we really have to take a hard look at, because that's an investment in our community. The other one, with respect to bringing more officers out there, we can reallocate our positions that we have, take people from assignments that they presently hold that may not be as important, and move them back out to patrol, and move them back out to provide the security there. So I'm big on not raising taxes. In fact, many of the people who endorse me because I'm not trying to start new programs. When a person comes out and says, I'm going to start a program and we're going to do this, what you alluded to is absolutely correct. You can't start a program without money. And where does the money come from? You all and your parents, right? So what do we have to do? We got to raise taxes so we can start new programs. I'm not about that. I'm about doing the job that we have with staying in our budget, with the exception of when we're working with people from the mental health community and the treatment side, because they're not budgeted for us. So we're going to need their help. And if we can secure grants, I think we can be very successful.
So more in depth, you want to go more into the mental health programs. What are your ideas so far, aside from advocating to the community?
Well, when you're looking at again, I'm looking at the mental health treatment, right? I want the treatment for the people there in the jail, so that we can start preparing them for their release. One of the problems, one of the cycles that you see here in El Paso is you have a person who's having mental health issues, and then they're not medically compliant, right? They're not taking their meds. Because a lot of the meds for mental health stuff, they have a lot of side effects, and people don't want to take them. A lot of them, they get very lethargic, they gain a lot of weight, they get very depressed. Who wants to take a medication that does that to you? That's supposed to make things better. So they get off their medication, and then they go into crisis. And we have a crisis intervention team, as does the El Paso Police Department. And if we can avoid taking those people to jail, that's awesome. They do a great job. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening, because our jails are still full of people with mental illnesses. So the crisis intervention team is something that is working, but it's not working the way it should, in that we still have people who make it into the facilities. So they get into the facility, then we start the mental illness medication, right, the psychotropic meds, and then they become med compliant. But then they're released, and what do you think happens? They get off their medications. So by working with the mental health treatment professionals, we can give them an opportunity to, once they're released from jail, to go back and get their medications, and we can even look at long-term mental medications, such as the injectables versus the pills, because a lot of them don't want to be taking pills all the time. So if we can do the injectables that I'm told by the mental health professionals can last for several months, then we're ahead of the game. That's gonna make things better, and it's gonna hopefully slow or stop that cycle of getting out, becoming not med compliant, committing a criminal act, and going right back into jail. Everything here is a cycle, and we have to do something to stop that cycle.
And then you said you wanted to go long term with these mental health patients. Would you want to do checkups on them after?
Well, we wouldn't, but I would definitely want them to go back and continue this treatment with these mental health professionals.
Okay. And then looking back at all your plans, how do you feel that your 33 years of experience has helped you along the El Paso community?
Wow, okay, so one of the big things I can tell you, after 33 years, I've worked every aspect of law enforcement. I've worked investigations, I've worked patrol, I've worked training, I've worked the jails. Very few people have that kind of experience. In fact, I can tell you that my opponent doesn't. There's a huge difference between us. If you don't have the experience of running a jail, then how can you run a jail? If you've never worked in the jail, how can you run a jail? How can I tell you that you can trust me to run an organization that I've never been a part of, that I've never had any experience in running. So I can tell you that my last assignment, for example, was a $42 million budget. That's a huge budget, but the money goes like that because you're spending it on salaries, you're spending it on food for inmates, you're spending it on transportation costs. You know, when gas goes up to $4 a gallon, it goes up to $4 a gallon for us too. And we're having to bus inmates from the jail annex all the way downtown. So you have to plan ahead, and you have to, I'll grab that here a little bit. You have to plan ahead, and you have to have the experience and the knowledge and the historical knowledge to be able to make those changes and adapt without exceeding your budget. And I bring all that to the table.
And then focusing more on the sheriff's office, how do you think this is going to help the sheriff's office as well individually aside from the rest of the community?
Well, I mean, as the sheriff's office is a reflection of the community, right? I mean, we employ people, right? We have over 1,000 people employed there in the sheriff's office that live and work in this community. We also have people that are contracted with us, people who work in the medical field, who work in our clinics, because we have 2 clinics, one in downtown and one at the annex. We have food service personnel. They also work within the community. So I think that as an organization like the sheriff goes, so goes your community. It's a reflection of it. When you have a healthy agency, when it's being run and managed properly, then you have healthy people back out in the community, and it just keeps your economy going. So it's very, very important. But, you know, every large organization, the police department, the sheriff's office, the teachers, the job that your teachers do, ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you, not only do they do a phenomenal job, but there's so much sacrifice that teachers make for the students that goes unnoticed. And you know, but that's what makes our community special, right? Because people are willing to do that. So I believe that we do well with the sheriff's office, with our teachers, with our police department, and that in turn filters back into the community and keeps our community healthy.
And at the same time, anything else to add to speak with any of the rest of the students?
No, I certainly, well, you know, as a law enforcement guy, I'm always looking at you know, the future of law enforcement, right? And just out of curiosity, is anybody here interested in a law enforcement career? Is that, got one? No, just one? Well, hopefully that'll change. Hopefully that'll change. Law enforcement's a very, very important part of the community. You cannot have a community without law and order. Society will not function without law and order. Look at what's happening in Haiti. Look at what's happening in other countries throughout the world where they've lost that law and order. It's very, very important to your community. It's very important to this country. I will tell you this, that as law enforcement recruitment has gone down, the pay for law enforcement has gone up because they're trying to bring people back. Okay, we're really trying to do it. And I really hope that some of you all will consider this because it's very, very important. And if you don't do anything else, you know, when it comes to law enforcement, do this. Take a look at your history. If you look at what happened in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, you had law enforcement lose track of what its role was. And law enforcement, I will tell you, here in the United States, the role of a law enforcement officer is not to put people in jail. Yes, it's public security, but that's a very broad definition. But I will tell you that law enforcement's primary responsibility is to ensure the constitutional rights of every person living in this community. That's the most important thing that you can do. And when you look at historically what happened in Nazi Germany, where you had law enforcement turn their backs on the people, and then they started moving the Jewish people and whoever they deemed undesirable into concentration camps. That was law enforcement. Can you imagine what it would be like to live in a country where law enforcement loses sight of their main responsibility in protecting its citizens? I mean, that was very, very tragic, right? And you all, as young people, it's your job to make sure that we don't repeat events like that and to make sure that events like that don't ever happen here in the United States. You look at law enforcement and how they handled the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Law enforcement was out there beating people who were peacefully protesting. You can't have that. And you know who's going to make sure things like that don't happen again? Our law enforcement leaders. And guess who our future law enforcement leaders are going to be? That's you all, right? So when you're looking at the community, you're looking at the health of the community, you're looking at how strong our community is, it depends on everybody to step up and take a leadership role and do their part to make sure that our community is safe and make sure that everybody has an equal right in this community to make something of themselves. And I certainly hope that if you don't pick law enforcement, at least pick something that's going to benefit the community, because you've got to be something, you've got to be part of something bigger than just yourself. Any of you all play team sports? Any football players in here? Any basketball players, baseball players? No? Okay, well, you're team sport people, right? You all know. You all know it's not about you. It's about your team. And so when you take that mentality and you push it over to the community, that's what's going to make your community stronger. It's not about you, it's about your community.
Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Thank you all very much again. Thank you, Mia.